Welcome to episode 8 of the Ready for More podcast.
Stop waiting for the perfect conditions and allow yourself to decide what it is that truly is important and that you want, and find ways to cultivate that in where you are right now.
Welcome to the Ready for More podcast, where we share success strategies and stories for women business owners, entrepreneurs who are ready for more for yourself and for your business. I'm your host, Heather Cameron, and I'm here to help you to discover your unique path to profitability and success so you can achieve your more on your own terms. Are you ready for more? You can find today's show notes and links at www.igniteyourmarket.com/readyformore. Welcome to the Ready for More podcast. Today's guest is Elena Sonnino, is a sought-after guide for living fully in the now to step into the spotlight of your life. As a life coach, speaker, and yoga teacher, her work is an invitation to remove self-imposed obstacles and deepen your relationship with your inner strength and wisdom. She helps individuals and groups feel more connected to themselves and less reliant on what other people think, so that they can step even more fully into the now and their wildest dreams. So welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited and honored.
I'm excited. We were talking before the show, and I think we're going to connect really well.
I think so too.
That was your bio. So tell us a bit more about your business and what you're doing and how you are a woman in business.
Yes. So I have been in business in this role for almost 3 years. Prior to this business, I was a classroom teacher for 12 years. And then I left classroom teaching and was a full-time blogger and freelance writer for about 4 years. And this morphed out of all of those previous things, the life coaching. I've always loved to be a speaker. I was the classroom teacher who at back to school night was like, open the door, let the parents in, everybody. I remember I would always call my parents. I have a close relationship with my parents, and I would call them when I would be leaving, and I would be just this exuberant ball of energy. And that's what speaking always did to me. The teaching and the guiding is interesting because I've always been a guide, for my friends all the way back to high school. And even as a classroom teacher, I was never the person who stood up in front of the room, whether I was teaching students or faculty or parents, and lectured, right? I never saw myself as that person. I asked a lot of questions and cultivated this mindset to foster independent thinking. And that to me is really the essence of what I do with my one-on-one clients, with my group clients, when I'm working at retreats or workshops, to ask the right questions, to get people to get out of their own heads, to get out of their own way, and reconnect with their inner strength and inner wisdom. My business is built really on this thing that I believe most in this world, that we have everything we need and crave inside of us. This lesson that I've been taught over and over again in my life, and that we just need sometimes a hand to guide us in that direction, to reconnect back to ourselves. But it's really less about me and more about the effort and the mindset and the willingness that my clients show up with. So I love working with women who are curious but afraid, haven't allowed themselves to be curious. They are often women that are really fabulous project managers of their lives and everything and everyone around them, right? At work, at home, on the soccer field, wherever it is. But they don't give themselves the time or the space to say, hey, what would this really look like for me? What would that wild dream be? Could I name it, right? And oftentimes these women, they're so stuck in fixing mode, right? Everything has to be, what could I do better? What should I do? We were talking about the shoulds a little bit before, and helping see those patterns, bringing awareness instead of judgment, and then cultivating that mindset of gratitude, of willingness, and curiosity.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's really good. I love the fact that you've gone through that evolution. I find so many women that I meet in business and who are in that newer phase of 3 to 5 years, the history they've come into that's brought them to the place they are now, particularly women who are over 40, but it's the history of how many different jobs we've had and how We've come to this point. And I think sometimes I hear women who feel that their jobs are, if they've done too much, that's a negative. And I think if you've done too much, that just brings more dynamic to you.
Absolutely. Well, it's interesting. I remember, I mean, the one thing I wanted most in this world, where there were two things, to be a mom and to be a teacher, right? I remember in my 20s, well, actually, I thought I wanted to be in international affairs and traveling around the world and doing public relations. And that really never came to pass until maybe I was blogging. I got a little bit closer to that. But the there was always that element, right? And it took me, frankly, coaching, I was trained as a coach when I was a classroom teacher to work with faculty and work with parents. But it took, when I was writing, I was actually in Jackson Hole, Wyoming for a half marathon. And the first morning we were there, I remember seeing these paragliders coming down the mountain. And I had never watched paragliders before, and I've never paraglided, never wanted to paraglide, never wanted to fall out of the sky. And I sat there and looked at them and went, I want to do that. And so after breakfast, we took the gondola up to the top of the mountain, and we watched as all of these, tandem groups went down, the pilot and the person who was flying for the first time. And I was so just what's the word? It's not coming to me, just captivated by watching them. And by the end of the weekend, I got to do it. It was actually our last morning. And there was something about that flight that just cemented everything about this dream to really take this next step and step into coaching, and knowing that it was the right thing to do. I think my business and most of my life has really come to be through unexpected moments and a really strong inner knowing, from personal things like deciding to run a marathon out of nowhere. I mean, I wasn't running 3 miles, and that came to be because a doctor had told me I couldn't once. And even starting a podcast now, right before I'm about to move, the coaching, my husband's an engineer. We have spreadsheets for everything. It was to say, hey, I want to, drop a lot of money to go take this training program and become certified, was not really the path that he was envisioning for that year. And to have a startup business like this, where, we have to nurture ourselves and the business. And it takes a little bit of hustle. It takes a lot of willingness, a lot of experimentation, and a lot of allowing for that clarity to shine through, right?
Yeah. And I love what you said about the listening to yourself, because I think that I so often hear people listening to everyone else, and there's so much coming at us these days, especially when you're new into business. And, there's a whole different conversation that happens for millennials, and then what happens for everybody else. It's a different conversation, but we're hearing it all. And I see so many women overwhelmed by that. They're overwhelmed by even in business, but in personal life as well. They're overwhelmed by the shoulds, and they're not tuning into their internal voice that says, yes, this is right for me.
Well, especially women, right? I mean, I'm 44, so a lot of my peers, our kids are getting older. You've spent so much time investing in your children, investing in work, or trying to find this mythical work-life balance, which I laugh. I'm like, really? Because exactly. To me, there are seasons for everything, and there will be ebbs and flows. And so the priorities will shift, and that has to be okay. But there are so many shoulds. And I mean, I remember even being a brand new mom, and I was getting ready to go back to teaching, and I was trying, right? We were experimenting with like the drop off to daycare kind of thing. And suddenly I had these 3 hours to myself, and I had no idea what to do with them. And the shoulds pop up. Well, I should use this time wisely. I should go do X, Y, Z. And it's that type of tuning in, right? That we first of all have to be able to notice those shoulds and catch them, and then decide, what are we going to do with that information?
Yeah, I know when I go to a networking event and I talk about the shoulds, I can see women's voice. Women's just like, they identify so much with it. Yes. And yet I think the shoulds we tell ourselves are the most destructive. I think the shoulds everyone else who tells are fine, but the shoulds that we tell ourselves are the ones that tend to freeze us and keep us in our path and not go. Yeah.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that. Earlier this year, in January, I think, tuned into a should that I don't know that an internal should that I wasn't paying attention to, it's not worth it, which was really, I'm not worth it, right? So it had to do with financial things, time things. And so what happened was, every time I started hearing that little story come out of my head, it was my like red flag. Okay, pause here. Notice this. What's underneath this? because that's a really interesting one, right? And it plays out in so many different ways. But yeah, I think you're right. It's the stories and those shoulds that creep up from inside, that often are coming from fear or, all sorts of different emotions.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's they're overwhelming sometimes.
They are. They
And
can be.
yeah, the exterior shoulds as well, but I think it's the interior shoulds that keep us from focusing. And that's
Yeah. I was just working with a client this morning whose interior should was she should be able to handle these things, right? She shouldn't react because she's smarter than that. She should know better. And that was a super interesting conversation to say, actually, well, why should you, right? Maybe because you're so smart, the should is actually to let yourself feel that it's an and instead of an or. But sometimes we need someone to hear us say these things out loud and to say, hey, I think I just heard you say this. And they're like, oh, because we often don't hear ourselves, right?
absolutely.
We pick things up in what other people do, which is my other favorite thing in some of my work, just when people get really frustrated about the interpersonal reactions they have, because oftentimes it's those things that frustrate us the most about others that become a mirror for what we might be saying to ourselves. So that's where I've learned to tune into some of my inner shoulds by what frustrates me about others.
That's a great tip, actually, because it's true, right?
Yeah.
See a behavior in someone else, it's probably mirroring what you see in yourself.
Yeah. And not in a judgy, I should know better kind of way, right? But in a, hey, awareness, let me check in kind of way. Yeah.
No, that's great. On your entrepreneurial journey, what have you learned the most? What's the most important thing that you've learned?
Oh my goodness. So I've learned that that the journey is not a linear path. And well, I've always learned, I think, throughout my life that it took me a while because I was super type A and goal setting oriented, but that it's not actually about the outcome. It has to be that the learning and the magic happens in the moments along that nonlinear path. And so that's the first piece. It's not linear, and that's okay. It's okay to want things, but that they're going to show up in different ways. And so the second piece that I've learned that I think feeds into that is that willingness and curiosity for me has actually been the most important part of my evolution as an entrepreneur, having a business, because it's when I get super clear on what's important to me, but then I allow for it to show up in ways that might be unexpected. And so it's doing things, I don't want to say just because that sounds a bit flippant, but with less attachment to the outcome. So because they feel good and they feel right, and they are in alignment or in integrity with my values and my purpose, but I'm not attached to exactly what it's going to look like. That's where I see my business grow. And the third thing I think for me that I've learned is that it's really, and this goes back to the not outcomes, but it's my business grows with relationships and over time. And in general, I think it's about that idea of planting seeds and harvesting, cultivating what's there for you without waiting for this big, beautiful bloom to emerge in the way that it's supposed to, it should, but really, so planting seeds and cultivating what's there along the way. So those are three things that are very interconnected, I think.
No, I really like that perspective of planting the seeds and cultivating, because you can't control the outcome of many things. I mean, for example, I have a client who wants to launch a new service, and she's very stuck. And and she's not launching it because she's worried about how many people might sign up for this, how many people will do it. And I keep going, well, you're not making any money by not launching the service. And there's a whole bunch of emotional ties up to why she's not doing it. But if she puts it out there and launches it, but the second step of it too, which I think was in your statement, was not just to put it out there and let it drop. You still have to cultivate it and help it grow. You still have to water it and feed it. And I think that's a wonderful analogy of letting your services or letting whatever you do. Because I know I've been guilty of launching something and not doing anything with it. So I'm not cultivating, I'm not growing it, I'm not nurturing it. It just kind of goes plump and you go, okay, that didn't work.
My favorite is to say that I've launched something and then realize that I've told 3 people and sent 2 emails about it over the course. I'm like, well, not really.
Exactly.
And there's also, so the other thing that I think I've learned is, and it goes back to that curiosity piece, but you know, I remember growing up and it was all about, you know, play to your strengths, right? What are you really good at? And the trick is that those strengths kind of become very comfort zoney. I'm really good at reaching out in all the same ways to all the same people. So one of the things I've learned to really value is brainstorming and letting myself be creative, but from a place, well, so I'll backtrack. The brainstorming, yes, but doing all of these things and any of the things on the to-do list, first having to be fueled by tuning into me. So it goes back to that inner voice, but I have to be really connected to me to make sure that those things are coming from a place that's deeper within me instead of my mind and those internal shoulds. Mm-hmm. So the brainstorming, all of those things, making sure that they're coming from this, what would feel delicious, what would feel joyful, what might be really fun. And not all of those things are going to lead to something or actually be realistic, but allowing myself to just get into that creative flow of brainstorming and seeing what emerges.
I love the words you choose to say. What would feel delicious? It's just like, that's such an empowering thought of what would feel delicious to do. I never used that one before in a work, Tim, but that is
feel free.
Wonderful, wonderful way to put it, because that just makes you feel the positivity of what you're doing, not nobody will buy this. I'm just like everybody else. There's nobody out there. There's no room for me in the market space. Why would all those words that flow in our heads?
Yes, which are real, right? Or not. But yeah, we feel them like they're real. Yeah.
It's the old adage of feel the fear and do it anyways.
Yes. And I think maybe this also comes into learning. I think the realization for me that there are all of the, you know, the marketing, the to-dos and all of the things out there. But at the very end of the day, I think that most of my business building actually comes from mindset work. You and I were talking about this briefly before, but it is cultivating a mindset where there can be expansion. Have you ever read the book, The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks?
I have heard of it. And yeah, I don't know if I've read pieces of it, I think.
Yeah. So he talks a lot about how we upper limit ourselves, right? How we create this glass ceiling. And when we get close to that, we then bring ourselves down kind of by self-sabotaging, self-imposed obstacles type things. And so for me, that mindset work and even that alignment, staying really rooted in what I know to be true about my values and my foundation is all about that, about saying, like, where could I expand, right? I've been talking a lot about ripples lately and our actions, those to-do lists being ripples that send out energy and then you receive it back, right? And so I've been thinking about my actions, my daily actions as ripples, because that feels much more expansive to me. Mm-hmm. So that was, I think, an important learning, that the business building, yes, but that the business building actually is rooted in the mindset piece. Mm-hmm. That until I'm clear on that, until I'm strong in that, and that takes daily effort. That's not just something that you perfect one day and is with you every day, because new things come up. They happen in life.
Absolutely. We are challenged every day and you got to go with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
What surprised you the most and in your entrepreneurial, moving from the school environment to being an entrepreneur? What surprised you the most?
Yeah. I think this is such a good question. The thing that surprised me the most is how much clarity is this wonderful thing that we aspire to, and yet this thing that we can sink ourselves in, that I'm trying to think of really how to word this, because I'm not sure, I don't know that I've ever said this out loud. So there's that. So we'll see what comes out. The idea that we actually, well, it goes back to that we have everything we need inside already, but that I've gotten really stuck in that search for clarity, right? Your search for your ideal client, the language, all of those things. And yet we spin that circle so many times and the answer has always been right there. But we're constantly trying to improve it, to make it better, to make it more crystal clear. And yet probably actually, in my case, overcomplicating it, right? And so I think that surprised me, of this spinning that can happen when we get caught up in some of the what everybody else is doing, because I've never considered myself as someone who, well, I compare myself like everybody else, right? But that did things just because other people were doing them. But I got caught in some of those aspects by needing to constantly refine, right? I had a coach mentor say to me a year ago, 6 months ago, I don't even know, look, it's not about refining anymore. It's about next leveling. Mm-hmm. And so that empowerment that comes from deciding, and the piece, I think, so this goes to the surprise, is allowing yourself to be wherever you are and step into that next level, because every day is frankly a new level. Right? It's an opportunity for a new level, rather than constantly feeling like you need to redefine, because over time things are going to redefine themselves or refine themselves naturally. Mm-hmm. And so it's letting that process flow. And so that also ties into the surprise, the work and effort that it takes to let that process be a flow, as opposed to having to control it and have it all in that linear path, because it's not linear.
I love that.
I don't know. Did that answer your question?
It actually is a great, whether it answered the question or not, it's a great thought about spinning, because I think, we were talking earlier, so this is being pre-recorded before I launch, of where I'm at with my launch, and I am spinning on my actual graphics, and it's just like, get it done. And so it's, you can get in this spin to try and be perfect, and whatever graphics I come up will be good enough, and I can change them when I want to, but I've been in this spin mode, so that will get me out of my spin mode now, and I need to launch, because I'm that close. I have everything else ready. I just need to get off the not being able to find the perfect thing. And I know I can spin. I can ruminate and spin on stuff when I get stuck in the perfectionist. And you mentioned your husband's an engineer. I'm trained as an engineer. Kind of conflicts with my much more naturally.
I understand.
I'm much more naturally intuitive, but when my engineering training clashes with my intuitive natural thinking is when I spin. And I recognize that, but I don't recognize it until sometimes I've spun for a while. So
absolutely. Well, and the other thing I'd add, I think, to what surprised me is how my business has grown. That the things that have truly taken off are the things that felt most delicious, to go back to that word, but I had the least attachment to. And they were the things that were kind of put out totally just, hey, this might be fun. Mm-hmm. And so we can plan and set goals and do all of those things until we're blue in the face. But what I've realized is it's the things that I hold most lightly that actually make the biggest difference in my business. And, though I'm not an engineer by training, that goal setting type A person wants to think, you've done all these things, A leads to B leads to C, not really, but that idea. And so I think that was a surprise, allowing for that possibility of how things would emerge and develop.
No, I like that. It's very, very connected, I think, with a lot of what people do.
Yeah.
What's been your biggest challenge?
Yeah, I think my biggest challenge has been most of the things that I've learned and surprised me, right? Of recognizing when I'm getting in my own way, when I'm trying to force something, and when it's not actually coming from that place of inner strength and wisdom. So, I've had some group programs that I've tried to launch because, I ran the beta group. It was fabulous. There was all this feedback. And so I'm ready, right? Let's put it out there. And yet it wasn't the right time or time of year. And I wasn't really thinking about, so if I was, that particular group that I'm thinking of was really for women who were moms. And so there I was, offering a program that was at, 7 p.m. Eastern time, which is when they're having, dinners or putting their kids to bed. And so it's thinking through some of those things, but I was really trying to force it, right? Because it was the perfect thing. The other thing that I think has been a challenge, and this is me being super honest, is that oftentimes, as coaches, it's not so much about me, but we think we know what people need. We're like, this thing, it's really fabulous and you will benefit, but it's not. So the challenge is taking the gifts, the strengths that I have, right? These things that I know are really positive and helpful, but really framing it in. So what is the problem that people are having and how does this solve that problem? So that's a continuing challenge, right? To really just get clear on, hey, it's not actually about me, but what is this thing that people are dealing with, and how does this apply to them?
And that's
yeah,
awesome.
so,
And that's actually something I work a lot with clients on, is that it's not, I do a lot of help with people who are trying to get their message across. And I don't even call it your 30-second elevator pitch. I call it your marketing mantra, because it's the message that you want to have in all your marketing. And it's not about you. It's about the outcome that they're looking for. And it's funny because one thing I see with women a lot is, and I don't see this with men, I come from a very male dominant industry, is women need to tell a story when they introduce themselves. And I had one person, I was at a networking event, this one woman stood up and told all of the reasons why she wasn't doing what she used to do. And then only in the end introduced what she had changed to. And you got lost in the story and you don't remember what she was doing, which was unique and really cool. And I could see her business growing, but she lost it in the story.
Yes. Well, I'm literally trying not to laugh out loud, because I have this fabulous woman who is supporting me right now, and she's looking at the copy on my site, and she has a draft of how she'd like to change the homepage. And I read it and I went, oh, and all this resistance came up because there's no story, there's no narrative, and I write in narrative, right? And I went, oh, and it was this like, my voice is gone. She goes, no, actually, these are your words. But it was not the narrative, the really, the relationship building, nurturing narrative. It was really clear, really concise. And I went, oh, so it's just so true, because I mean, that is absolutely a challenge. I think for a lot of people, I know for me.
And you need both, right? Because when it reads in the narrative, it's important. When it reads in the story, it's important. I mean, when I look at people's websites or messages, you got to be clear on the first couple of sentences to catch them in, and then you can tell the story. So never eliminate your story in your natural voice.
Yes.
But it's in the old world of websites, which is almost smaller now, it's above the fold. Right. So above the fold is used to be your screen. Now above your fold is the size of a smartphone. Yeah. Right. So really all you need is that really catching question or statement that brings them in, and then you can tell the narrative in your own voice. Yeah. But yeah, women need to tell a story which gets in their way of the message.
Yes.
And it's one of those, yes, that's good, but not in that way. So it's a great example of understanding one of the challenges we have to face.
Oh, yes. I'm there.
What advice would you give another woman who is in business? They're looking for more. And this leads into, I know, your expertise or your area of not just living, but thriving. So what advice would you give them?
I think the advice that I would give them is to stop waiting, right? To stop waiting for the perfect conditions for XYZ to be done, for, to meet certain benchmarks, and allow yourself to decide what it is that truly is important and that you want, and find ways to cultivate that in where you are right now. Because if we're constantly trying to fix and working from a place of what we don't have to that end goal, we miss everything that's happening in between. Those little benchmarks, those little indicators. I led a call for coaches in the training program that I was a part of, and helped them. And one of my favorite things is, what's going right each day. So instead of just looking at the bottom line numbers at the end of the year or when we're doing taxes, which are important, I don't mean to diminish those, but I think we're really good at noticing what's not going right, what's not going well, what goals we haven't met. And we don't give ourselves enough credit for the steps that we are taking. And so really being mindful of what does exist, where can you step into that and let it expand around you. So I think that would be my advice. And it's, I often talk about stop fixing and start living. Mm-hmm. So it's that same, right? Allow yourself to be in the now, because if we're spending all of our time in the past of what we used to do, or the future of what we want, visioning isn't bad and reflecting isn't bad, but it's when we get stuck there that I think we get into trouble, and then we forget to see what's right in front of us. And I think that would be my one really big token of advice, because I think it's important, and it's something we all do, and it impacts us every day a little bit differently. I mean, it can be little things and it can be really big things, but really tuning into what's going right How can you let yourself be right now and expand where you are right now without that coming from scarcity or fear or not enoughness?
Excellent. What would you like? What are some ideas or techniques you could share about doing that, right? So, you catch yourself in the future, you catch yourself in the past. How do you bring yourself to the now? Is there any ideas you can share?
I mean, my favorite, and I had a client the other day say to me, I finally get it. You could really do this anywhere, is taking 3 breaths.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can take, and when you catch yourself spinning in that past or that future, for example, right? And you can stand, you can sit, you can be anywhere, you can close your eyes or not. 3 breaths and just notice, right? Notice where your mind is and then decide, right? Is that where you want to be? So that's the question and the tool that I like to use, because that breath grounds me back in the moment, but also in me. I mean, I like to say 3 breaths is fabulous, 6 is just decadent.
That's wonderful.
So, and the reason that I think it's the tip that I lead with is because you can do it anywhere, right? You can be in the car, you can be at the office, you can be at your desk at home, you can be out at Starbucks or wherever you might be. But it's just, it's that one thing. And then I think the second piece would be, what would I do if I wasn't worried about the outcome?
Mm.
What would I do right now? What would feel delicious right now if I wasn't, if I believed I would succeed,
mm-hmm.
right? And then I think the third tip that I would give, which is one of my favorites right now, is I've been playing with it pretty much every single day, is acting as if. So what would you do? What would you say? What would you eat? How would you dress if you already had this thing that you wanted? Right. Mm-hmm. So as a speaker, I tend to wear most of my day to day. I work from home, so yoga clothes. I mean, I'm also a yoga teacher, so there's that. But and yoga is part of my daily practices. However, right, a motivational speaker isn't going to show up in her yoga clothes. So I have really fabulous clothes in my closet. They don't get worn as much. So allowing myself to say, actually, that dress is going to help me tune into how I want to feel today, and that energy of that end goal, if you will. And so giving yourself permission to act as if, it's like role playing. And to me, it's a mindset tweak that just brings us in. The last tip, so I think this we're up to 4, this may be too many, sorry.
No, 4 is good.
One of my favorite ways to realign with what's important to me, we were talking about this before, is music. And I sing out loud. No, I mean, it's cringeworthy for my almost 14-year-old daughter who is a singer. She's like, stop. But I have a playlist that really embodies how I want to feel around some of the goals that I have. And I mean, when I sit down to my desk and first thing in the morning, or if I'm putting away laundry or doing different things, which are some of my like decluttering tools that I will give myself during the middle of the day, I will sing out loud, turn on that playlist, press shuffle on Spotify so I don't know which song is coming next, and sing out loud. And that just brings me back to the energy that I want to cultivate, instead of going down that rabbit hole or quicksand of the other stuff.
No, those are all great. And I'll put a note in the show notes of where you can find her playlist, because I was listening to it this morning and it is great. One thing you said too on the act like you're there, it's interesting. I was listening to somebody else a week or so ago, and she had a really interesting analogy. Was like, if you know who Mr. Right is, are you acting like the woman who Mr. Right would be attracted to?
Yeah.
Right. And it was really interesting, because normally you think, well, put your list of Mr. Right out there and then look for him. Well, this was a challenge of, instead of looking for him, act like the person he would be attracted to. And I think that applies to business too. Are we acting? Are we behaving in the ways that a successful business person would?
Absolutely.
And it's not always working harder. There's lots of people out there who are very successful in business, whether it's service or product based or whatever, and they work more efficiently. They don't necessarily work 50 hours a day. They work in a more efficient model because they're laser focused on what they want to do, and where their moments of brilliance are, and they get big. They grow their business enough they can outsource the stuff that's not their moment of brilliance.
Absolutely.
And that's an important part too.
Well, and to that end, we have to nurture ourselves, right? Whether it's through play or creativity. I mean, if you think about, kids, right? They spend so much time playing, being creative, without worrying about how things are going to look until they get to certain grades in elementary school and the teachers make them, right? But until that really fine line, but it's allowing those parts of us, those creative parts of us, to be nurtured, to be fed, that I think inspires some of my best ideas, happen not when I'm at my desk, they happen when I'm out on a walk, or I'm sitting out reading, or I'm in the shower, or I'm in the car, and luckily for voice memo on the phone that I'll press it and be like, okay, remember this.
It's absolutely true. I get most of my best ideas either in the shower, particularly for clients. I'll be thinking, oh yeah, they could do that. Or walking the dog in the woods and just being out in nature, and the power of just resetting.
Yeah.
And like you said, breathing, which I think I don't know how we as humans forgot how to breathe, but we have forgotten how to breathe. And it's the simplest thing that we can do to kind of reset ourselves, or just get out and go into nature and go. It was I was reading your blog on the 7 go-to disruptors, and going out in nature and sitting and facing the sun were wonderful suggestions on just how to ground yourself again.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad they are really music. And I think the sun, it's so important to just get outside, and, whether you can feel your feet against the earth or just feel that fresh air, we're stuck inside a lot. And I think we forget. And even I, who know that those are my disruptors, sometimes I forget. And the breathing is funny. So yesterday we just closed on the sale of our home. And it wasn't until 1:30 when we got the email that, because closing now, I don't know if it was ever really different, but in my head, you're at a table, everybody's there, you're signing. It's not how it happens. We spent 5 minutes signing papers. They went later, but 3 hours later, I hadn't heard anything. And when I finally did get the email, I was like, oh, that's what it feels like to breathe. I didn't realize I was holding my breath all morning. Yeah. So yes.
And that's true. And that's, we don't realize we're holding our breath. We don't realize we're doing that. Yeah. What would one of the things I often battle with for myself and with clients is this fear of success and fear of failure. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure which one ever predominantly is. It's always hard to isolate. Is there a difference between the two? I'm not even sure. So that feel of failure and feel of success, is there some advice you can give about just kind of grounding yourself on that? Because it is a predominant thing.
Yeah. I think they're real, and I think we need to honor them. I spent a lot of my life not allowing myself to feel fear, I've realized. And I think it's an important thing that we have to let ourselves feel, but then choose, right? So that's where we cultivate the mindset piece of how do we want to feel? And so the success, the fear, to me, it's almost that idea of how good are we willing to let ourselves feel? How successful are we willing to let ourselves be? And some of that comes from The Big Leap, that book that I talked about, Gay Hendricks, I think he talks a lot about, but I've really, really thought about this. And so for me, it's one of the things I've been kind of setting the intention of, where can I let the expansion be even bigger? What haven't I, right? And not in a always trying to do better kind of mode, but where could I let myself be where I am, but then just allow it to be more successful, allow it to be more abundant. And what would it take for me to be that person? So kind of going back to what we were talking about just a few minutes ago, but what would I have to release to allow myself to feel that success? And what would I need to call in, right? I think the other thing about fear and success is that, so I once had a doctor say to me, when I found out I was pregnant, I was 5 weeks pregnant. I wasn't supposed to be able to be pregnant. I had had chemotherapy. I had been told that even if I were to get pregnant, the eggs wouldn't be viable. So not to go there, but just what the doctor said to me was, because I was really afraid when I first found out that I was pregnant, you could mourn or you could celebrate until the day you can't. And so that to me really fits into this fear of failure and success, because could I be right here because impermanence is real, right? Things are constantly changing and fluctuating, and what works one day won't work another. And that has to be okay, because or else we can't survive. But it's coping through that by just saying, I'm right here. Where can I let myself celebrate? Where can I let myself feel successful? Where can I learn?
I
right?
was going to say, where can I grow? Where can I learn? Where can I do that?
Yeah. Yeah.
There's, I shared this in an earlier podcast, but there's this woman, high jumper she's
Mm.
younger, but she speaks to girls in school, and I love her message. And her message is her whole profession is you only win when everyone fails,
Mm.
right? You only win when so you're jumping to jump to your best, and then you're going to fail. And then you go back and you try again, and you jump to your best, and then you're going to fail.
Yeah.
And I just thought, what an amazing analogy, especially as an Olympic athlete, because they're doing this with
Absolutely.
laser focus to what they want to get to, which is to be the best in
Yeah.
the world. And but it is that I don't know where failure became such a bad thing, right? You know, you
Yeah.
try, you fail, it doesn't work out, you move on, you take your learnings. I about 4 or 5 years ago, I set on a whole niche market that I did trade shows on. I did all my collateral, and it didn't work out. And it didn't work out because the market has a very set mindset, and I was a disruptor. I didn't know how to be a disruptor then. I do now. But if I went back now, I would do it differently.
Yeah.
But it failed, but I learned so much, right? I learned a lot
Yeah.
on there, and I haven't beaten myself up for it. It's just, okay, time to reset and try all the stuff that you learned over there. And I think failure can freeze us instead of allowing us to take a lesson from it and move on.
Absolutely. A surf instructor, when I was trying to learn to surf, said to me, could you practice determination without expectation?
Oh.
So it goes, that idea of, yeah, you are going to fall. I mean, I learned to surf, but I actually, I really learned to epic belly flop instead. So there's that. And the other, who is it? Coel Simpson, who does equus training, so coaching with horses, says, I think it was her, there is no failure, there's only feedback.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just that, it's that always being, considering, not in a not enough kind of way, but in that always wanting to be a student, always, thinking about things as drafts that are, just evolving. So,
and I love that, bringing back to our audience, is that I find lots of women, we've been taught almost to, we've had our kids, we've had our job, it's time to retire and go out to the pasture or whatever, we're go golfing or whatever. And I'm like, but women are brilliant, and we have so much to offer. And I come from an entrepreneurial family, and my father stopped working at 84, but he would have kept going. Like, he was a plumbing contractor, then he owned a gas station before that, and then he bought a maple syrup farm when he retired, and he did that until his body wouldn't let him do it anymore. And to me, that's living, right? And he found it wasn't a full-time job. He built the lifestyle he wanted. It suited him and my mom. And it was like, you don't have to be cut off at, once you've done and your kids are grown up and you maybe finished from the job that you were doing during that, it doesn't mean you have to stop.
Yeah.
You've got so much, and that your whole message of living and thriving. Thriving doesn't have to be somebody else's prescription to retirement. I was once in a room I live in a government town, and I was at this seminar, and it was this woman asked, how many of you know when you're going to retire? And like 80% of the room was like, I could tell you to the day. And then there was the 20% of us who are entrepreneurs who said, I don't plan to retire. And she asked that question, how many of you don't plan to retire? And like 3 of us put up our hands. And that's the potential, I think, that women need to know, is it doesn't have to be all or nothing. It doesn't have to be you're done and it's time to go off and golf, or not that there's anything wrong with golfing, but
no. But who is it? Diane Ackerman. One of my favorite quotes is, I don't want to get to the end of my life and realized I lived the depth of it. I want to have lived the width of it as well.
Awesome.
That's awesome. So it's that idea of letting yourself be so fully in the experience, awake and present at work and in your life. That to me is the crux.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Where can our listeners learn more about you, or find out and follow you and find out what your podcast is?
Sure. So my podcast is called Sunrise in Your Pocket, and they can find that on Apple Podcasts or at my website, which is elenasonnino.com. And they can learn all about me there. They can listen to the podcast there if they want. There are blogs and all sorts of hopefully interesting tools for them to play with.
And her playlist is there.
And my playlist is there, yes.
Which is great. I do have 3 questions that I wrap up with. You've already answered one, but I'll repeat it anyways. What's your superpower?
My superpower is to create and hold space for people to reconnect to themselves.
Excellent.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's your favorite quote and how it applies to you? I know you just had that, but I'll get it.
That's all right. To make sure it is. Yeah, it is. Diane Ackerman, I don't want to have gotten to the end of my life and realized I lived the depth of it. I want to have lived the width of it as well. Yeah, it just, everything about it, right? To me, it's about being awake, about being present.
I love that. What's the one most important message you'd like our listeners to take away from our conversation of being a woman entrepreneur?
Yeah, that you truly have, you don't need any special equipment. You don't need all the special courses, the certifications. I mean, those things are all fabulous, but at the very core of you, you have everything you need already inside you, in that inner strength and wisdom. And that tuning into that might just be the magic and the sunrise that you need.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for spending time with us.
Thank
I've
you.
really enjoyed it.
It was so much fun. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Ready for More podcast. You can find today's show notes and links at www.igniteyourmarket.com/readyformore. My name is Heather Cameron. I'm your podcast host. And when I'm not hosting this podcast, I'm busy working with entrepreneurial women like you who are ready for more in their business and are looking to get focused on their own unique path to success. You can find more about myself and my programs at www.igniteyourmarket.com. If you like what you heard, feel free to rate, review, and share with your friends. And don't miss an episode by subscribing. Until next time, remember, now is the best time to focus on your more and be inspired by your own unique gifts.